When an NFL team makes a roster move in complete silence, that's not strategy, that's fear. Because no one panic signs a backup lineman in Week 14 unless they're out of time and out of options. This week, the Cleveland Browns quietly pulled Kendrick Green off another team's practice squad and didn't even try to spin it as a depth move. They didn't wait. They didn't explain it. They just plugged him straight into the active rotation. No build-up, no press conference. Just a transaction buried in the news feed like they were hoping no one would notice. But fans noticed immediately. Because this isn't just a fix, it's a message, a warning, and maybe a last-ditch attempt to protect something much bigger than the offensive line. Because this season hasn't been about Shedeur Sanders' talent. That conversation ended weeks ago. The real conversation now is, can he survive behind this offensive line, before this all comes crashing down? And this move sent a message to everyone watching. The Browns might have waited too long. The moment the transaction hit the wire, fans didn't scroll past it, they froze. The Browns had just signed Kendrick Green off of the Buffalo Bills practice squad, and within hours he was already elevated to their 53-man roster. No ramp-up period, no development arc, just plug and play. That kind of move doesn't whisper strategy, it screams urgency, especially this deep into the season. Front offices don't make impulsive decisions like that unless the clock is ticking louder than usual. And in Cleveland, it's deafening. On paper, it looked like a quiet roster tweak, the kind of transaction nobody's supposed to notice. But within minutes, social media lit up. Fans weren't wondering who Kendrick Green was, they were asking why now, and more importantly, what happened behind the scenes to make this necessary. Because this isn't how calm, confident teams operate. This is how nervous franchises try to plug holes before the whole thing caves in. The timing wasn't random. The Browns were heading into a high-stakes divisional matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, not exactly the team you want to roll the dice against with a shaky offensive line. The last thing they needed was another public breakdown in protection. The spotlight was already brutal, especially with Shedeur Sanders under center. Cameras have been locked on him every week, dissecting every pocket collapse, every hit, every ounce of pressure. And this week, the stage was even bigger. So when the Browns made their move, it didn't look like a fix, it looked like a reaction. And reactions always tell a story. They reveal where the pressure is actually being felt. This wasn't a long-term rebuild strategy. This was scrambling. The kind of scrambling that happens when internal meetings stop being calm and start getting sharp. When fans stop being frustrated and start getting vocal. When a rookie quarterback starts looking like the only thing holding the team together while also being the one getting hit the most. Officially, the story was clean. Green was signed, added to the roster, and listed like any other transaction. No fanfare, no bold declarations, but everyone paying attention knew something had broken internally. The Browns didn't pitch this move as a confidence builder. They didn't even try to explain it. And that silence said it all. If this were a development move, they could have waited. If this were about long-term planning, they could have made it earlier. But dropping someone from a practice squad into an active starting environment in the heat of a playoff chase screams of one thing. Someone upstairs saw a problem, and they weren't willing to wait another week to fix it. And you wouldn't even need to read the fine print to guess what that problem was. Just watch the film from the last 4 games. It stares you in the face. Snap after snap, Shedeur Sanders is either sprinting for his life or absorbing contact before his reads can even develop. And sure, quarterbacks take hits in the NFL, that's part of the job, but this wasn't normal punishment. This was protection breaking down instantly. These were free rushers, clean lanes, and linemen visibly confused mid-play. At some point, it stopped looking like miscommunication and started looking like collapse. That's what triggered this move, not one blown block or one ugly quarter. It was weeks of the same story playing out in high definition, while fans stopped asking for patience and started demanding accountability. Every week, the questions grew louder. Not about Shedeur's readiness, but about the line S. Clips began going viral. Threads filled with slow-motion breakdowns, showing exactly where the play fell apart and whose number was involved. One particular play caught the internet's attention. A 3-man rush, 5 linemen, and a free blitzer hitting Shedeur before his 3rd step. That's not a matchup loss, that's confusion. That's a breakdown that goes beyond talent and touches something deeper: communication, trust, structure. And when fans see that on repeat, they don't just want change, they expect it. So when Kendrick Green's name popped up, the reaction wasn't celebration, it was analysis. People immediately began researching his past, his tape, his time with Pittsburgh. Some were cautiously optimistic. Better than nothing, they said. Others questioned whether he was even an upgrade. But almost no one believed this was about adding a missing piece to a perfect puzzle, because the puzzle's been scattered on the floor for weeks. This was triage, plain and simple, and that's what made the move so revealing. It wasn't the signing itself, it was what the Browns didn't say. No reassurance, no promises. Just a roster change and a hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be enough to buy another week, to protect the franchise's most important asset from taking yet another unnecessary shot. Within hours, the reaction had already divided the fanbase. Some were asking whether this was a turning point. Others wondered if it was too little, too late. But very few people missed the deeper story building beneath the surface. Because in the NFL, the quietest moves often say the most. The Browns didn't announce that their offensive line was in crisis. They didn't have to. For weeks, something had been bubbling just beneath the surface. It wasn't outrage yet, not quite. What fans felt was closer to confusion. How could a team with this much talent still look this unprepared up front? How were the same protections breaking down in the exact same ways every Sunday? At first, people tried giving it time. Maybe chemistry just needed to build. Maybe it was growing pains, a learning curve, new schemes, new quarterback. But every time another clean shot landed on Shedeur Sanders, that benefit of the doubt shrank. By the time Week 12 rolled around, confusion gave way to something much stronger, frustration. You could hear it in the stands. You could read it in every post-game comment thread. But most importantly, you could see it on tape. These weren't just one-off plays anymore. These were patterns. Identical breakdowns across multiple games, even against mediocre pass-rushing defenses. It got to the point where fans were calling out the pressure lanes before the snap, just based on alignments they'd seen burn Cleveland over and over again. When breakdowns become predictable, patience dies. And then the real shift happened. Fans stopped just complaining about the performance and started naming names. Comment sections turned ruthless. Screenshots circulated showing assignments blown wide open. Reddit threads filled with slow-motion clips of untouched defenders flying off the edge or up the middle while linemen looked in opposite directions. The wild part, it wasn't just fans watching film anymore, it was going mainstream. Local sports radio began questioning the leadership on the offensive line. Podcasts shifted tone. Even beat reporters started describing Cleveland's protection as a liability, not a problem to solve but a crisis to contain. And with all that noise, one thing stuck out. None of the blame was landing on Shedeur. If anything, people started defending him more. They saw the hits, the blown plays, the cameras catching him walking off slow, holding his ribs, checking his gear after every big collision. This wasn't a rookie melting down. It was a quarterback getting dragged into chaos every single week. And fans began to resent that. Not just because of the plays lost, but because of what it represented. Cleveland had finally found a signal caller who could carry himself like a leader. And instead of building around him, they were leaving him to survive. That's when things got louder. Not from Sanders, who stayed composed in every press conversation, but from everyone else. Analysts started asking if the scheme was fit to protect a mobile, smart decision-maker like Shedeur. Pundits questioned whether the line had the athleticism to handle exotic fronts. And fans started going nuclear. Specific jersey numbers kept popping up in threads. Cam Robinson's name appeared more and more frequently, often next to words like liability, lost, or sidelined. That pressure didn't stay online, it flooded the stadium. People weren't booing Shedeur. They were groaning at pressure the moment the play started. Groans after 3-step drops led to hits. Gasps when a blitzer came through untouched again. The energy shifted entirely. It was no longer an audience reacting to outcomes. It was a crowd bracing for impact the moment the ball was snapped. And make no mistake, the front office hears that. They always do. Not because fans are suddenly coaching experts, but because perception shapes the narrative. And narrative in the NFL moves everything. It moves pressure inside the building. It moves conversations in film sessions. It shapes how coaches handle position groups and how players carry themselves during the week. Even when the film tells its own story, the noise becomes impossible to ignore. Especially when it's this targeted, this loud, this emotional. What's wild is how quickly the conversation flipped. 5 weeks ago, most of the criticism surrounding Cleveland still orbited Shedeur. Was he ready? Did he hold the ball too long? Could he adjust to the speed of the pro game? Then fans started watching the film deeper. And the more they watched, the clearer it became. Shedeur was making the right reads. He was checking the ball down. He was adjusting when deep roots weren't there. He was doing exactly what a smart, coachable quarterback is supposed to do. And yet, the punishment kept coming. That's when frustration turned to alarm. Fans didn't just start asking about missed assignments, they started talking about injury risk, about confidence erosion, about what relentless, weekly beatdowns can do to a young quarterback's trajectory. And they weren't wrong. In the NFL, pressure doesn't just ruin games, it reshapes careers. Ask any team who watched their rookie QB take 60 sacks in a season how that storyline ended. These moments don't just disappear. That emotional tipping point, from tactical frustration to sheer concern for your quarterback's safety, is what made the Kendrick Green signing feel so different. Because by the time the Browns made a move, it almost didn't matter who they signed. It just mattered that they finally did something. Fans saw it as acknowledgement, a white flag. Not a fix, but a signal that the silence was over and the franchise had finally admitted what everyone else already knew. And even for fans who weren't sold on Green, even for those calling it a band-aid on a bullet wound, the reaction was nearly unanimous. At least you're doing something. Because when a team refuses to protect its quarterback, the rage builds. But when that quarterback keeps showing up, keeps competing, keeps getting up, despite everything, that rage becomes something even heavier: accountability. And in Cleveland, accountability had finally arrived. There's a moment in every NFL season when fans stop asking questions and start demanding answers. In Cleveland, that moment didn't arrive with a blowout loss or a single disastrous snap. It came slowly, painfully, week after week, as the exact same problem kept showing up on screen. Protection breaking down, pockets collapsing, clean hits to the quarterback. It was never just one guy, never the same defensive look. But the end result was always the same: Shedeur Sanders picking himself off the turf while everyone else looked around confused. It didn't take long before the pattern was impossible to deny, because this wasn't about elite defenses exposing mismatches. It was happening every week, regardless of who they played. 3-man rushes beating 5 men up front, delayed blitzes coming through completely untouched, running backs tasked with blocking edge rushers while linemen drifted into open space with nobody to hit. These weren't just breakdowns, they were systemic. Repetition is what raised the alarm. Mistakes can be forgiven. Patterns, not so much. Clips flooded online. Fans weren't just complaining anymore, they were dissecting. Pausing film mid-play. Highlighting per-snap alignments. Posting slow-motion replays with captions like, "This is not how protection works," or "Why is nobody sliding to the blitz here?" And the frustration didn't stop at breakdowns. What fans started seeing was effort, or lack of it. Stance too high. No punch off the line. Missed assignments being repeated by the same jerseys every week. Eyes started drifting toward the offensive line coach, the coordinator, even the front office that built this unit in the first place. And gradually, the mood shifted from panic to blame. Because once people start seeing failure as something they could have predicted, they start thinking it should have been prevented. One play, in particular, went viral for all the wrong reasons. Shedeur drops back, scans, and in under 2 seconds, a rusher comes screaming through the gap untouched. No chip, no slide, nothing. The center slides left, the guard engages late, and Shedeur never finishes his drop. The play died before it began. Fans didn't need advanced analytics to diagnose that. They didn't need all 22 film to know something was seriously wrong with how this line was communicating, or more dangerously, how they were. That's why the Kendrick Green signing hit so differently. It didn't come off as hopeful or strategic. It came off as emergency room triage. One lineman doesn't solve this, and everyone knew that. Kendrick might bring toughness, backup experience, and fresh eyes, but he's not fixing chemistry overnight. No mid-season shuffle does unless the core issue gets addressed. And in Cleveland's case, that issue might not be just talent, it might be deeper. Communication, effort, structure, leadership. And all of that leads back to a bigger concern. This wasn't just a failure to protect Shedeur Sanders physically. This was a risk of failing him developmentally. Because the quarterback everyone questioned at the start of the year, he's already answered those doubts. The mechanics are sound, the reads are quick, the decisions are getting smarter by the week. But none of it matters if you can't stand upright long enough to execute. That's what made the film so infuriating. Even when he processed efficiently and made the right moves, he still had defenders in his lap. The contrast became impossible to ignore. Quarterbacks around the league were taking bad sacks. It's part of the game. But Shedeur, he was taking clean hits after executing correctly. That's not on him. That's on what's in front of him. And once fans spotted that difference, they rallied behind him even harder. The frustration stopped being about play calls or arm strength. It became about one thing: why are we wasting what we finally have? Because let's be real, Cleveland has spent years looking for this. A quarterback with poise under pressure. Someone unshaken by noise. A young player who doesn't flinch after a mistake, doesn't crumble after a sack, doesn't throw teammates under the bus. That presence is rare. It's the kind that elevates a locker room, sets a tone, holds people accountable without saying a word. And instead of protecting that asset, the team was forcing him to survive every single snap. You could see the concern bleeding into the locker room, even if no one said it directly. Players talked about the need to stick together, to respond to adversity, to make sure our guy is good. That's coded language in today's NFL. It's how teams admit the pressure is real without opening a firestorm in the media. And this time, everyone knew where that pressure was coming from. It was coming from up front, from miscommunications after the snap, from breakdowns so consistent they had to be more than just bad luck. So when the Browns pulled Kendrick Green from a practice squad and gave him a jersey by the weekend, fans didn't over-celebrate. They understood what it meant. It was too late for statements. This move wasn't about answers. It was about survival. And it sent a second message too, one that traveled quietly but powerfully. Your spot isn't guaranteed anymore. The offensive line room just got a warning shot. Performance matters. Effort is being watched. Film sessions are no longer hypothetical critiques, they're decision meetings. And if weekly protection failures continue, this won't be the only personnel change. It'll just be the first. If you only looked at the transaction log, you'd miss the meaning entirely. Cleveland Browns signed Kendrick Green. That's it. Simple. Standard. But to everyone watching closely, fans, analysts, players in that locker room, it was anything but. That signing didn't just add a body. It added pressure. It was a quiet but deliberate shift in tone from the organization. And not just because of who they brought in, but because of how they did it. No speech. No announcement from the podium. No media blitz to sell optimism. It came and went, transaction wire only. That silence said more than any press release ever could. It told you this wasn't about strategy, it was about urgency. And when front offices operate in silence during a crisis, it's not because they don't know what's happening, it's because they do. This wasn't a move made with confidence. It was made with caution. A subtle admission that something had gone too far. The timing was surgical, just days before a divisional matchup, where every moment under center would be scrutinized and recorded. By pulling Kendrick Green straight into the mix without public discussion, the Browns said everything without saying a word. They knew the cameras were coming, and they weren't willing to run the same offensive line out there again. But here's what makes it all matter. This move wasn't made for Kendrick Green. It was made because of Shedeur Sanders. That distinction speaks volumes. When teams make quick adjustments like this late in the season, it's rarely about the guy coming in. It's about the guy you can't afford to lose. Green wasn't an answer. He was a message to everyone. To the fans, to the locker room. And even to Shedeur himself. To the fans, it said, yes, we see the same problems you see on film. To the O-line room, no one is safe if this keeps happening. To the quarterback, it said, we're listening now, we get it. We waited too long, but we're making a move. But just because the message was loud doesn't mean the meaning is simple. Kendrick Green isn't a star acquisition. His track record is all over the place. He's played real snaps, sure. He's even started in high-pressure environments. But he's also bounced around from Pittsburgh to Houston to Buffalo without building long-term trust anywhere. Teams haven't fought to keep him. They've let him go. And that reality adds another layer to everything. This wasn't about finding the guy. It was about sending the signal. The front office had to do something, not just for football reasons, but for perception reasons. And in the NFL, those two are often more connected than people think. Fan sentiment might not decide playing time, but it absolutely reaches upstairs. Comment threads turn into media narratives. Media narratives turn into pressure. Pressure turns into jobs being questioned. And what the Browns couldn't withstand anymore was the appearance, even the risk, that they were standing still while their most valuable player was taking the hits himself. That's why this signing hit so different. It wasn't a fix. It was damage control. It told the world a truth Cleveland hadn't wanted to admit yet. We know this isn't working. We just don't know how fast we can fix it. And for the locker room, that message cuts deep. When a team brings in a new face at a position group without warning, it changes everything. The rhythm shifts. Competition gets real. Film sessions tighten. Mistakes that were brushed off last week suddenly get paused and replayed. You can almost feel the tension by Wednesday, linemen watching tape, knowing that someone is actively looking for a reason to shuffle the lineup again. That pressure doesn't just hang in the air. It motivates and exposes. There's also something symbolic about moves like this. NFL players aren't dumb. They understand when a new guy is walking in the door with a real opportunity versus when someone's coming in just to fill a practice day. The way Kendrick Green was signed, and immediately active, sent a signal that nobody could ignore. He wasn't a depth piece. He wasn't a scout team body. He was being asked to step in and somehow stabilize a crumbling unit without warning. And if that sentence sounds familiar, that's because it already describes the quarterback he'll be protecting, which is where everything connects. Because no one in Cleveland really believes Green is the missing piece that's going to transform this line into elite. He might help. He might hold his own. He might even inject a little edge into a unit that looks like it forgot how urgent this season still is. But the real value of his signing is psychological, for the team and for the city. It's the Browns signaling that they finally understand the stakes. That protecting Shedeur isn't just about keeping him upright, it's about protecting their entire plan for the future. Because when you draft or invest in a quarterback who changes your identity as a franchise, you don't just build an offense around him, you build a standard. And every unnecessary hit, every confused lineman, every blown check, it chips away at that. Internally, players know the energy changed when Shedeur arrived. This isn't a kid trying to earn his spot anymore. This is someone commanding attention without needing to ask for it. Week after week, he stood in the fire and made people believe. That belief can carry a team only if the team decides to carry him back. And this move, it might not fix the problem, but it's the first real sign that someone upstairs is finally trying. Up until now, it had mostly been whispers from the outside. Fans venting online, analysts dissecting clips from the All-22, commentators speculating. But Cleveland's locker room, the coaches. Publicly, they stayed silent until they didn't. Because just when the heat was starting to boil over, offensive coordinator Tommy Rees decided to speak. And what he said didn't calm the storm, it completely flipped the conversation. While everyone else was pointing fingers at Shedeur Sanders, Rees did the opposite. He stepped to the microphone and backed his quarterback, fully and clearly. Not with vague motivational coach speak, not with empty praise. He pointed to details that only coaches and quarterbacks truly understand. He talked about reads, decision-making, game management against heavy cover shells, situational awareness, not flash but function. And that was the moment a lot of people realized something most already suspected. Shedeur wasn't the problem. Rees didn't mention anyone by name, but he didn't have to. He talked about Sanders consistently making the right decisions, adjusting protection pre-snap, checking down instead of forcing hero plays, taking what the defense gave him, even when the offense wasn't giving much back. It wasn't just support, it was validation. A public recentering of the conversation, away from the quarterback and toward the structure around him. The timing was no accident. The complaints were getting louder, the hits more concerning, the scrutiny heavier. So when Rees praised Sanders for the drives that stayed alive, not just the ones that lit up highlight reels, it shifted pressure in one clean statement, without calling anyone out directly. It was subtle, but deeply intentional. Because when a coach praises a rookie quarterback for avoiding negative plays and keeping the offense on schedule, he's implying something deeper. There are other parts of this offense not doing their damn job. Outside the walls of team headquarters, fans picked up on it fast. That single press conference ricocheted across social media within hours. People clipped the moment where Rees described Shedeur's poise on early downs, called attention to his maturity under pressure, and emphasized his command of the playbook. No vague platitudes, just strategy, substance. And in that moment, the conversation inside Cleveland's fan base took a sharp turn, because now it wasn't about whether Shedeur Sanders could play. It was about whether the rest of the organization was holding him back. That narrative shift isn't small. It's seismic. Suddenly, critics weren't spending segments debating if Sanders was reading defenses fast enough. Now they were asking why those decisions still resulted in sacks. Why quick passes weren't enough to neutralize rushers. Why screens were getting blown up at the line of scrimmage. And when those questions start being asked out loud by media, the message inside the building gets louder too. For weeks, the quarterback had been standing in front of microphones, never making excuses, never throwing teammates under the bus. But when the coaching staff finally spoke up in his defense, it stripped away any ambiguity. If Shedeur was doing his job, the problem had to be someone else. And that's when internal pressure started building. Because when a coach goes public in support of his quarterback, it fires a warning shot through the rest of the roster. It says, we're not blaming QB1 anymore, so who's ready to step up? Whether it's the line, the receivers, the route spacing, the blocking assignments, something had to give. That kind of pressure either galvanizes players or it exposes them. There is no in-between. What made Reese praise even heavier was what he didn't say. He didn't try to sugarcoat the performance of the offense as a whole. He didn't talk about identity or progress or future outlook. He kept it in the present. He talked about execution, and when a coach narrows his language like that, he's drawing a line. Shedeur is doing what he's coached to do, so why isn't it working? That subtext bled into the fan reactions too. Suddenly, people weren't just angry about the hits Sanders was taking. They were pissed about what those hits represented, a team failing to match the growth of its quarterback. It opened the door to a new kind of frustration, not just with poor play, but with poor response to it. Fans genuinely started wondering, is the coaching staff moving fast enough? Is the front office reacting early enough? Or are they still playing catch-up while the season slips away? More than anything though, Reese's defense sparked clarity inside the building. Before that moment, the conversation could still be vague, a mix of blame and speculation. After that, all eyes shifted. Shedeur wasn't being shielded. He was being spotlighted as the guy doing his job while others scrambled to catch up around him. That spotlight has weight. And now that it's been turned away from the quarterback, it's shining directly on everything else. The blocking schemes, the sideline adjustments, the play designs for 2nd and 11, the third down calls that leave backs to pick up edge rushers solo. All of it. Which is why the Kendrick Green signing suddenly mattered more. Because from that moment on, fans weren't saying, give Shedeur time. They were saying, give him help. Protecting a quarterback changed from a football issue to a cultural one, an identity issue. Because if the Browns finally had their guy and still couldn't build around him, what did that say about them? Now, each snap feels like a test of how serious the organization really is. Not just about winning games, but about evolving, growing up, breaking bad habits, because there's something you can feel in the way Shedeur walks onto the field. Not arrogance, expectation. He doesn't carry himself like a rookie trying to prove he belongs. He carries himself like someone waiting for the team to catch up to where he already is. The Browns can see it. The coaches can feel it. And now, they've said it out loud. The question is, will the rest of the roster respond? The moment Kendrick Green stepped onto the practice field in a Browns jersey, the energy didn't change, it tilted. Not because he was some savior walking through the door, but because his arrival forced everyone to ask the question the Browns hadn't dared say out loud. Is this enough? That's where the conversation shifted, from frustration to skepticism. Because let's be honest, everyone watching knew Kendrick Green wasn't brought in as some centerpiece fix. He wasn't some former All-Pro with a Super Bowl resume stepping in to clean up the mess. He was a former third-round pick who'd bounced around from team to team, never staying long enough to earn lasting trust. Pittsburgh gave him chances, then let him walk. Houston gave him breathing room, then moved on. Even Buffalo, a team desperate for line depth, left him on the practice squad. So when Cleveland grabbed him mid-season and tossed him directly onto the active roster, it didn't scream solution. It screamed desperation. Fans were quick to divide. Some clung to cautious optimism. Anything's better than what we've got. Others weren't convinced. They called it exactly what it looked like: damage control. A band-aid over a wound that was already deep, infected, and festering publicly every week. Because picking up a leftover from someone else's bench, that's not a plan. That's a reaction, a rushed one. And reactions don't fix systemic issues. They highlight them. Because here's what no one really wants to admit: one offensive lineman doesn't fix chemistry. He doesn't erase weeks of busted protections. He doesn't suddenly help a center identify pressure better. He doesn't rewrite the instincts of a group under fire. At best, Kendrick Green can bring attitude, a touch more toughness, and maybe raise the temperature in the meeting room. But structural issues? Those stay, unless addressed very publicly and very deliberately. That reality hit home fast. Social media threads filled with two kinds of comments: cautious hope and outright sarcasm. One tweet went viral saying, "Green's not here to protect Shedeur, he's here to protect the coaching staff from headlines." Brutal? Sure, but not completely wrong. Because the timing wasn't just about matchups, it was about narrative. Cleveland couldn't go into a divisional rivalry game with eyes across the football world opening wide and act like they were fine. They weren't. Everyone knew it. Players knew it. The quarterback knew it. Fans had already turned. Something had to shift, and so they reached into the bucket of what's available and pulled out. Someone. Green represents exactly that: availability. And availability is very different from reliability. That's what made the signing divisive, even unsettling. Not because Kendrick himself did anything wrong. He's a professional. He's battled, he's started, he's played through noise. But the resume is what it is. He hasn't stuck anywhere. That's not judgment, it's footage, it's fact. And when that's all you've got to plant as your flag in the middle of a season with rising stakes, it tells you more about the fire than the extinguisher. Which brings us back to what this move really represents: acknowledgement. Not confidence, not correction. Just a rare moment of clarity where a franchise says to its fans, in the quietest way possible, "You're right, something's wrong, and we're trying." That still matters, even if it sounds small. Because NFL teams don't change culture in press conferences. They do it through decisions. And for the first time, the Browns made one that signaled self-awareness instead of stubborn denial. Green's jersey number might not fix the scheme. He might not even crack the starting 5 week in and week out. But the message set off a ripple effect. Jobs aren't safe anymore. The O-line room knows it. The tone inside the building shifts when a depth signing gets active roster status immediately. That's not rotation, that's threat. When one guy goes from practice squad to suiting up in a matter of days, it's not depth, it's incentive. Film sessions get sharper, reps have edge, and players who have coasted on job security start double-checking their assignments instead of coasting through walkthroughs. You could feel that quiet tension building. No yelling, no open finger pointing, but a different kind of silence, the type that only exists when people know changes are being watched, not just hoped for. Kendrick Green being here means someone else? Might soon not be. That unspoken pressure is also what fans had been calling for, not to cancel players, not to scapegoat, but to see urgency. Real acknowledgement that this isn't just football, it's survival. Teams don't just lose seasons from poor protection. They lose development, they lose quarterbacks, they lose fan bases. The signing may not fix the unit overnight, but it ends one thing conclusively: the silence. And once an organization starts reacting, even imperfectly, it triggers something bigger: accountability. And in this case, that accountability is aimed squarely at a front five that for weeks had coasted under the illusion of continuity. What happens next depends on more than Kendrick Green's individual play. It depends on whether he was the spark or just a temporary patch for a franchise still debating how honest it wants to be with itself. Whether this is a one-off plug or the beginning of a reshaping. And no matter how quietly the Browns want to carry out those decisions moving forward, one thing is already clear: everyone's watching now. The Cleveland Browns have carried the same label for decades: a franchise stuck in a loop, dysfunction, instability, endless quarterback turnover. Every few years, a new face arrived under center. Different jersey number, same story, promising start, crushing end. Not because the arms were weak or the minds weren't sharp, but because the chaos around them never changed. Systems, schemes, coaches, protection, all of it in constant motion while the most important piece got buried beneath the pressure. But this year, it felt different, because Shedeur Sanders doesn't match the old story. He didn't enter as some quiet rookie hoping to get acclimated. He arrived with presence, with command, with expectation. And whether the Browns were ready for that or not, the tone shifted the second he showed up. For the first time in years, fans didn't hope for stability, they expected growth. And Shedeur played like he knew it. Everywhere he goes, something follows. A different kind of magnetism. A track record of walking into overlooked programs, flipping narratives, and forcing people to take notice. He did it at Jackson State, then again at Colorado, surrounded by noise, surrounded by criticism, surrounded by doubters who assumed flash meant no substance. And every time, he turned that chaos into clarity. That's the energy he brought to Cleveland, and it's exactly why this moment feels so much heavier than any midseason struggle. Because this isn't just about a quarterback under fire. It's about a franchise on the verge of wasting something it's never truly had. A leader who doesn't flinch. A player who expects more than slogans. A quarterback who doesn't just speak differently, he acts differently. And right now, that difference is being tested. Because while Shedeur has played with poise, with maturity, and with accountability, the franchise around him still looks unsure of what it wants to be. One week, it doubles down on toughness. The next, it backpedals into excuses. One week, it makes a move to shore up protection. The next, it tells the world it's still evaluating. That inconsistency isn't just a problem for fans, it's a warning sign for everyone inside the building. Because players notice, especially quarterbacks, especially smart ones. Every hit Sanders takes compounds more than pain, it compounds doubt. Every game he walks into underprepared, every blown assignment that goes unaddressed on the field is another reminder that he's fighting two battles, the opponent and the organization's identity. And here's where that battle gets dangerous. Because if Cleveland fails Shedeur Sanders, it won't look like past failures. It won't be a messy interception or an ugly fumble that ends his run. It'll be slower, quieter, a gradual erosion, a confidence drain, a quarterback forced to shrink himself to survive instead of challenging the culture around him to evolve. That's what fans are afraid of. Not losing games, but losing momentum, losing belief. Losing the only quarterback in years who's looked like he expects to win every week, regardless of the record. The signing of Kendrick Green didn't create that fear, it confirmed it. It confirmed that inside the front office, people are starting to feel the pressure. Not just from the outside, but from the optics. From the reality that this isn't just another developmental year. Not anymore. This is the window. Because when a quarterback starts proving himself faster than the team builds around him, the clock starts ticking. Sanders isn't walking with the weight of doubt. He's walking like he knows what this could be. And when that kind of gravitational pull clashes with front office indecision, something eventually gives. Critics say the Browns are just doing what they always do, reacting, not building. Cracking under pressure, hoping a sudden fix keeps the headlines quiet for one more week. But supporters are starting to push back. They believe the Kendrick Green signing, the tone from the coaches, even the subtle uptick in urgency, all point to something else. A shift, a slow, uncomfortable confrontation with a franchise's old habits. Either way, the debate itself proves how much the narrative around Cleveland has already changed. Because a year ago, the national story would have focused on the quarterback, picked him apart, called him overhyped, unready, a system guy. Now, that noise is dying. Voices across the league are admitting what fans saw weeks ago. The issue is Shedeur. It's the line, the system, the silence from leadership. Even rivals have started saying it out loud. Not criticism, respect. Every team in the league can recognize when a young quarterback's doing more with less. Every defensive coordinator who's hit him on third and long and still watched him stand tall for the next drive knows what Cleveland has. And that's what makes this moment volatile. Because if the Browns fix it, not just schematically, but culturally, they don't just save a season. They change trajectory. They leave the old narrative behind. A team that finally grew up, finally put its quarterback first, finally shifted from survival mode to future-proofing. But if they do, if the hits continue, if the protection remains fragile, if the message up top keeps being "let's wait and see," then this ends like it always has. Another promising chapter buried under the weight of what could have been. This isn't about Kendrick Green. It's about whether the Browns are finally willing to change around the quarterback who already has. Sometimes, it's not the number of sacks or the yards lost that exposes a franchise, it's the quiet decisions, the rushed signings, the timing that doesn't fit the story the team is trying to sell. Like this one, right here. Kendrick Green, former starter, now a mid-season practice squad pickup, suddenly suiting up for a team fighting for its quarterback's life. He didn't arrive in a blaze of press conferences. He showed up with a jersey number, no context, and a job that immediately felt bigger than his name. That's how you know things aren't stable. When fixes arrive without fanfare, when explanations go missing, and when urgency starts peeking through cracks that leadership spent all season trying to patch up. Because make no mistake, this move wasn't just a roster adjustment. It was a signal, a warning. A front office quietly admitting to itself that doing nothing had started to feel dangerous. And in the NFL, that kind of realization usually comes too late. Think about it. You don't scrap stability midseason if you're building with confidence. You don't rush a practice squad lineman onto the active roster during a playoff race unless the ground is already wobbling underneath everything you've built. You do those things when momentum is slipping away, when questions are stacking higher than the win column, and when it becomes clear that your young quarterback, The one who's showing maturity beyond his years is the only thing preventing full-scale panic. That's what Shedeur Sanders represents right now. Not hype, stability, and that's the irony. The Browns, long known as one of the league's most chaotic, dysfunctional teams when it comes to quarterback development, have finally landed a player with the exact opposite energy. Locked in, coachable, poised, not asking for sympathy, not shaken by pressure, not blaming others. He's doing everything you want from the position, and somehow it's still not being rewarded the way it should be. Not with protection, not with consistency, not yet. That's why the move for Kendrick Green isn't about Kendrick Green. It's about what happens when the quarterback is no longer the problem, but the entire organization is still learning how to support him. It's about internal hesitation, about needing to show something, anything, to a fan base growing more frustrated by the week, and to a QB room quietly watching how the team takes care of its future. Because if Shedeur keeps holding up his end of the bargain while the rest of the operation stalls out around him, things get darker quickly. He becomes harder to build around, not financially, but emotionally. He becomes the guy who takes the hits while waiting for the front office to catch up. And no quarterback, no matter how talented, can carry that kind of structural burden week after week. Especially not when the physical toll adds up, in bruises, in hesitation, in eroded trust. That's what Cleveland is up against now. Not another AFC opponent, not just a tough defensive front, but time itself. The longer you wait to correct what's broken, the more valuable time you lose developing what's already working. Because Shedeur's not waiting around to develop into third-string humility. That's not who he is. He came into this league ready to command a game plan, to process quickly, to take control when others hesitate. And he's done that in hostile stadiums, behind shaky protection, with people dissecting every second of tape and waiting to pounce on any dip in performance. And to his credit, through all of it, he hasn't blinked. So the question is whether Shedeur is built for this. He is. The question is Cleveland? This franchise has always struggled with identity because it's never had one it fully believed in. Past quarterbacks walked in with questions and walked out with regrets. Coaches were hired as saviors, then tossed away as scapegoats. Promises were made. The fan base watched them unravel year after year. There's a reason every moment of hope in Cleveland is met with suspicion, because history's always nearby, ready to remind them things can fall apart at any moment. But this moment, it's different. It could be, because Shedeur has started to flip the script. Slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. The conversation around him has changed. Pundits aren't questioning if he's ready, they're wondering how much longer he can hang on without help. Opposing coaches are game planning for him, not exploiting him. Veteran teammates are backing him, not side-eyeing him. The weight he's carrying is real, and he's carrying it with a level of maturity that should make this entire front office move faster than it has. And that's what Kendrick Green's signing ultimately represents. Not a fix, not a master plan. Just a moment where action finally replaced denial. It was the Browns saying, "We can't keep pretending everything's fine, not while our quarterback is proving he's worth more than we're giving him." And if that sounds like a small step, remember, these are the kinds of moments that define timelines. A single game, a single hit, a single shift in tone, that's how change begins, or how a slow collapse is confirmed. So now the real drama kicks in. Will this be the move that unlocks urgency, that inspires deeper change, that finally rallies the locker room to protect the most important piece on the roster? Or will it be remembered as the moment where Cleveland recognized the fire, but grabbed a water bottle instead of calling in help? Because this season won't be remembered for a wild-card bid or a close loss in December. It'll be remembered for how the Browns protected their future, physically, strategically, and publicly. Did they step up when it mattered? Did they evolve? Or did they do what they've always done, react too late and hope talent alone could save them? Shedeur Sanders doesn't need miracles. He doesn't need excuses. He just needs a front office brave enough to see what they already have and start treating it like it matters. Because if they do, the fans won't need stats to remember how this story ends. And the next time Cleveland has a quarterback like this, they won't.